I want to jump right into content, so I'm not going to go through the impressive biographies of our speakers today. I'll briefly introduce them. We have Don Futterman, Executive Director of the Israel Center for Educational Innovation, and Mary Ann Stein, President of the Moriah Fund, joining us, and we're going to have a conversation on strategies for closing the educational gaps in Israel. So really, I'd love to turn it over to you two.
Could we have everyone in the room at least?
Sure. Yeah, we could do a quick round robin of folks in the room and via the web. Introduce. Sure. So I already went. Who would like to go next? Okay.
Gideon Stein. I'm the treasurer of Moriah Fund and founder and CEO of Late Sale Education.
Max Kleinman, I was for many years the CEO of the Jewish Federation of International West, and I'm now consulting with the National Jewish Federations and the Jersey Performing Arts Center on an Israel Ascending initiative.
Having my share, I was director of public affairs at the Israeli Consulate, and so do this.
David Fishman, president now emeritus of the Gimbridge Foundation.
I'm BZ Halberstam. I work at a private equity and hedge fund in New York. My interest here today is I'm probably most deeply involved in education initiatives around the Haredi community. So I thought there was enough overlap to try to understand how those things are being done so I can learn something from them.
I'm Paula Gottesman. I'm president of a philanthropic fund, and I am a supporter of the dance program, whatever you call it.
I'm Melissa Rosen, and I am also a JFN staff member. Along with Shira, I manage my primary mandate is managing our matching grants portfolio.
Wonderful. Folks via the web, would you like to quickly shout out your name?
Hi, Sophia. I am the Israel Program Director for See the Dream Foundation. Happy to be here. And I'm going to close my video.
Okay. Bye.
Hi, this is Adina Popko from the Natan Fund.
Hi, this is Lori Resnick-Fleischman from Los Angeles.
Hey, welcome. Welcome, everyone.
This is Cindy Rowell-Powling from the Max and Marjorie Fisher Foundation.
Wonderful.
And Stacy Turner from the Jim Joseph Foundation.
Great. Thank you. Thank you all.
Is that it? Is there anyone else? Okay.
Well, thank you. I'm Don Futterman. I'm the Executive Director of the Israel Center for Educational Innovation. We'll tell you a little bit about what ICEI is all about in a few minutes. I wanted to open with just kind of stating the problem. Israel is an amazing success story with our amazing high-tech accomplishments, our economy, achievements in all kinds of areas of research, agriculture, pharmacology, defense. People would probably think that our educational system would be excellent. And that would make sense. We have some Nobel Prizes under our belt as well now, and some of our schools actually are quite good, and some of our universities are outstanding. Unfortunately, Israel's overall academic outcomes are not impressive. Our students on international tests sit stubbornly near the bottom, or at best, some of our cohorts get to the middle of the pack. And in Israel, as in much of the Western world today, and the United States is experiencing very much the same issues, there is a fairly direct correlation between the socioeconomic status of a school and the students' outcomes. And Israel is actually the lowest in the OECD, the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, which is essentially an organization of Western developed countries. And so that means that if you're a child growing up in an upper middle class or a wealthy neighborhood, you're likely to get a very good education. If you're a child growing up in a poor neighborhood, you're likely to get a poor education or be in an underperforming or failing school. So the situation is significant also because Israel has quite a high level of child poverty, which you wouldn't necessarily know if you don't get to some of the poorer areas. But according to our own National Insurance Institute, the percentages are around 30%. And according to the OECD, our child poverty level is the highest in the entire group except for Turkey. So this impacts children's opportunities and impacts their outcome. Let's take a look at the first slide. Michal Cohen is was the Director General of Israel's Ministry of Education. When she left that position earlier in the year, she said in an interview with the Haaretz, "We still have not succeeded in severing the connection between socioeconomic status and learning achievement levels, and the central problem of the educational system are the learning gaps. A child who doesn't have basic language skills and lives in a culture of poverty starts off with a gap, and too often that gap follows that child throughout their academic career." Below that, you'll see the statistic from the National Insurance Institute, Bituach Leumi, that 31% of Israeli children are considered to live in poverty. That's below Israel's poverty line, which itself is quite low. So there's even more children who are living in quite dire circumstances. Those are statistics from 2015. So we know that low outcomes affect children's opportunities in life quite directly. Low scores will keep you out of sometimes already prestigious middle schools or high schools. It will limit your opportunities in the army if you're growing up in the Jewish sector in Israel, and will also be an obstacle, an obstruction for you to get to higher education, whether to a college or to one of Israel's universities. So the stakes are very, very high.
I just would add that the stakes are not only high for the children, but for the country, because if 30% of the children are in underperforming schools, we're missing out. The country is missing out on the contributions that those children might make. Some of them surely would make if they were able to achieve their full potential.
So take a look at the next slide. Here we're just going to show you one piece of data for now, and then we'll leave the slide alone for quite a while. But this is showing scores for 3 groups of children on the one standardized exam that's administered, or the set of standardized exams that are administered while children are in elementary school. Today, a sampling each year of students are tested when they're in 5th grade in the 4 core subjects for the elementary school system: Hebrew, math, which really are the major subjects, also science and English. This is looking at the Hebrew exam, which is really the most important subject in elementary school. And you see the outcomes while they're improving over the years, the 10 years that you can see on this graph. The gaps are consistent. So the red line on the bottom there are the children in low-income schools. The green line are the children who are in middle-income schools, and the blue line on top are the children in the upper middle and upper income schools. So we see a very direct correlation. Even though there's improvement, the gaps remain, which also could reflect that the testing has changed, the tests have changed, but these gaps persist. Now, the situation for the target population that we really launched our program to try to help with the Ethiopian Israeli children is even more serious. We're going to leave the slides. We can turn that off for now. But the Ethiopian children are living in the highest poverty levels in the Jewish sector in Israel. There are Arab children, particularly Bedouin children, who are worse off. But some statistics say that between 50 and 65% of Ethiopian children are living today in poverty, and their educational gaps were the most glaring. When we first launched the initiative, I'm also the program director for the Moriah Fund, and at Mary Ann's initiative 12 years ago, we started looking at what we could do to raise achievement levels for the Ethiopian Israeli children. And we were seeing back then was that 30 to 40% of Ethiopian Israeli kids were getting to middle school, graduating 6th grade 1 or more years behind. And a child who gets to middle school 1 or more years behind is going to have a very hard time catching up. Middle schools do a very poor job of closing gaps. They are kind of the big morass of the school system in most Western countries. And it means that aside from cherry picking high achievers, a lot of these kids' academic fates were already sealed. So we will go into the history of how we got into the work that we're doing, but we were very concerned that those gaps seemed to be growing during elementary school. And so we designed a program to intervene at that point. I'll say there's good news. We shouldn't be despairing. The good news is that the situation is improving. According to a Knesset research report from May of this year, over the last decade, scholastic achievements of Ethiopian Israelis have been on the rise, and the gap in Hebrew language study has been reduced between Israelis who are non-Ethiopian and the Ethiopian kids. And for the gap between the Ethiopian children and other children in those same income areas, the gap is reduced even more, in part because of the work we're doing, and in part because of other things that are going on in society. So there is a positive trend, but those gaps still persist. And that is a problem to have these kids lagging behind. So what we want to spell out today, what we'd like to do, what we want to open here with is really a couple of things. We want to share with you some of the reasons why low-income schools tend to underperform. Why are the achievement levels in these schools so disappointing? We want to tell you a little bit about how we try to address those questions, and share with you some of the experience we've had specifically with our first target population, which was and continues to be the Ethiopian Israeli children. I'll say at the outset that all the work we do is for all children in the schools. Because when we first got into this business, we saw Ethiopian Israeli children being stigmatized as not being equal and not having the ability to reach high levels of achievement. We saw that many of the pull-out programs were reinforcing that stigma. Programs were pulling the kids out of classes or setting up parallel tracks for them. So our program has always been fully integrated, always designed to raise the levels of all children in schools. So in the process, we've developed models which actually will work for all low-income schools, and we'll come back to that a little bit later. Mary Ann,
Yeah, I just wanted to add here that the Moriah Fund for 25 years has been, among other things, it's had a focus on Ethiopian Israelis. We actually worked with some funding in Ethiopia before Operation Solomon to assist in the efforts to get them able to go to Israel, and we actually continued that until just a couple of years ago. But in Israel, we worked closely with the activists in the Ethiopian community, and their major concern was, I mean, they had a lot of concerns, and they do, but a major concern of theirs was that their children were not progressing well in school. And they knew, and I knew, that if the kids can't progress in school, that they can't keep up with their peers, there are serious problems, and Don talked about some of them, but they also then become an underclass. And what we found was that as these children lagged behind, there was an assumption, actually, that it was because they were intellectually inferior, and that the entire Ethiopian community is intellectually inferior. And that obviously promotes discrimination, and we saw it happening. And we saw it happening in the education system, and we saw it happening in other places. And frankly, if children are not educated, if they cannot read and write and express themselves in conversation, then they are not going to succeed academically, they're not going to succeed in the jobs they may get, etc. And Israel will have a permanent underclass, which would be quite problematic from either side, any side. And so we put a fair amount of our focus in trying to find some solutions to this. And we started by funding the programs that existed, which were primarily after-school tutoring programs. Other types of programs as well. But what we saw was that those programs could make a difference in the short term, but it didn't last, and it wasn't adequate to really bring those kids up to where they needed to be and allow them to stay there. So our feeling was that the problem was in the schools. Most of the programs we saw were add-ons or insertions into the school programs. And as Don said, the ones that were in the schools were segregating these kids out and giving them some kind of special attention. But nothing was changing the way the schools, the teachers, the principals were dealing with these children, what they were teaching, how they were teaching. And we were steered to a program in New York, actually, that was providing assistance to underperforming schools. Demographics not so different from these low-income neighborhoods that these kids were coming from. And we were very impressed with some of what they were doing and the ways they were individualizing the instruction in the classrooms. So if you teach all the kids from the same text, so let's say you have a textbook or you have a printout or whatever, and you expect all the kids to comprehend that and to do the work in that, some kids it's too easy, but they'll be okay. Other kids, it's just right. And then for many of the kids, as many as 30% of the children in these schools, they don't know what's going on. And they're not learning anything except that they're doing. So our sense was that helping the teachers learn to individualize their instruction and making sure that they had the resources and the training to do so was critical. And we didn't see it happening in other schools. We know now there are some other schools that are actually working with the teachers in the classroom, but we didn't see that happening.
Just a side comment, we can hear some typing, I think. I'm sure someone's taking amazing notes on all the interesting things that are being said. If you could mute yourselves, if you're joining via the computer, and if you're joining via the phone, if you just hit star six. Oh, star six, apologies, no thank you. That would be helpful, thank you.
And then when it becomes time, that if you have a question, you can, on the phone, you can hit star six again to unmute yourself.
Great. So that was how we began. And we started in 3 schools in Netanya testing this, and we learned as we went along. And Don will explain what is part of our program, but I do want to emphasize that we have found that changing the school itself, training teachers and training principals with hands-on training. So we added to the schools a full-time professional to be a coach to the teachers, and then we have an experienced principal who mentors the principals. And on the third hand, there are megastream mediators who work with the parents to try to get them to be positively engaged in their children's education. And the idea is to decrease the stigma and to make the teaching actually effective for every kid in the class. So that basically was our rationale for getting involved and for really starting this program that is an add-on. And the one thing I would say about the add-on programs is you cannot expect a child to sit in a classroom for 5 or 6 hours a day, every day, and not know what's going on, to be able to catch up with a few hours a week of remedial assistance. Among other things, and they can't get all the things they need to get, but also there's a negative to it. They really do feel diminished and less. So this is a way to change that. David?
I'd like to first applaud and support, contribute to perhaps 1 or 2 thoughts on the underlying issues. The Ethiopian population is dissimilar from the New York population in that it is not a culture of poverty. It is a culture of immigrants who are a particular group of immigrants. They are illiterate. They and their parents and their parents' parents were illiterate in any language. As a result, there was no culture of promoting literacy in the home. This is unlike any other immigrant group to Israel, other than, let's say, the most recent group coming from Africa that is filtering through. That's one thing. The other thing is a cultural aspect which may be related, but which is acknowledged by Ethiopian leaders. So I hope I will not be guilty of charges of racism here. There is, within the Ethiopian culture, there is an element of great respect for authority, especially in terms of age, not questioning. Therefore, not questioning teachers if you don't understand them, not questioning the orders of army officials if you don't understand, or if you not trying to raise your hand and say, but. Very much unlike the typical Israeli cultural norm, which we are somewhat familiar with, of very much challenging authority. So it is with those two insights that I think the success of programs which you have been involved in funding should be assessed. There is not a culture that you have to fight against the history of the culture of poverty, and it is something which could be changed if one bears in mind these two issues.
Well, I appreciate that, but in addition, we find that there are those factors can be addressed within this particular framework, and they are. And it's, well,
how we do it. I mean, I think it's a great point, because look, we built our whole program focusing on literacy, because we looked at this target population and we said the glaring weakness that's consistent from year to year is in language skills, because of what you said, because the vast majority of the community came from illiterate homes and had never been to school. So there were no books in the homes. Parents didn't know what school was about. They don't know what reading is about. And they didn't know how to encourage that the way that our kids would get that literally from the day that they're born. So we see that literacy is the most crucial mission of elementary school. And there's a few levels of it. So first of all, there's obviously reading, writing, speaking, and listening. And our program, as it's evolved, has put a stronger focus on speaking and writing than it did initially, because we see that the speaking is the strength we can work off. You always want to look for what the kids have. So we have our kids speaking quite a lot from the beginning, and we have them writing literally from the first day of first grade when they don't even know the letters of the alphabet yet. And we see enormous growth here. But we've discovered that this is also the key for learning literacy, to learn the basics of how to learn any subject. You need language, and you also need routines. You also need discipline to advance in any subject area. And that's the underlying foundation of STEM or STREAM education. Because where our kids struggle, where low-income kids struggle, is they cannot handle complex text. They don't have the vocabulary, the conceptual knowledge, the experience with reading that other kids have. And what we found, because we're tracking every single kid in our program, we got 7,000 kids, 25%, 30% of them are Ethiopian, but the rest are not. We're seeing that these problems are everywhere, that all low-income kids, or the majority of low-income kids, are struggling with the same sets of issues. For the Ethiopians, it's a more extreme situation because of the vast majority come from illiterate homes. The other part of what you're saying, I think, is also crucial. When we look at programs in the United States, we know that we're not dealing with multiple generations of family dysfunction. We're dealing with immigrants that have gone through the traumatic experience of moving to a different culture. The families often are intact. We do have high numbers, high percentages of single parent families, single mother families, and we're looking for ways to address those needs as well. But yes, the situation is not identical. So what we learn here are teaching methodologies that have proven more effective. So whether we work with the Reading and Writing Project Teachers College, or I'm here this week, I brought some of my staff to take part in principals training and supervisors training for the Relay Graduate School and visiting a number of schools. So we learn from everybody, and we're looking at things that can be replicated or adapted to the needs of Israel. Interestingly, the Ministry of Education has asked us now to provide these services to other low-income schools as well. In all 23 of our schools, we have concentration of Ethiopian kids, and we will always continue to give those schools top priority. But there are plenty of other schools that have similar needs, and we're developing programs, and we're talking with the ministry about developing a much stronger partnership to meet the needs of those schools as well.
But I would say too, that although the reason Moriah started this was our concern for the Ethiopian kids, one of the things that I have seen is that all of the kids in the school are benefiting. So these were failing schools, and the ministry pointed us to them, except in the first few schools where we started in Netanya, it was the city. But they know these are schools where their results are really very poor. So our goal, as Don said, is we're individualizing the instruction, but we're aiming to reach every kid in the class. And I have teachers who come up to me and thank me for the program because they say to me, I've been teaching for 13 years or 20 years, and this is the first time I can reach every child in my class. And it doesn't matter whether it's a big class or a small class. Having 600 to 1,000 books that are leveled and the kids know what level reader they are is not available in other schools.
So let me say a little bit about who we work with. We partner, first of all, with the Ministry of Education. That's the main player in Israel in elementary education. The system is very centralized, and we have an excellent relationship with them. We are collaborating with YEDA in 3 of our 23 schools. That's an Israeli organization that's affiliated with the KIP network of charter schools in America. And we're working together, looking at interesting models, learning a lot from the things that they brought in, and bringing in our pedagogic and instructional models and teacher supports. We work with the Fidel Association, which is the leading organization to promote education within the Ethiopian community. And we work with the Pajama Library, which we recruited them early on because these children have no books in the home, and we want to get them to start having habits of reading. We want them to have habits of reading and writing from early on. And we partner with other groups. We partner with 14 municipalities. So we know how to work together. This was originally a project of the Moriah Fund. Today we have 25 funders. Some of Paul you're here with us today, and the Gimprich Foundation are among many of the JFN members who are generous supporters to ICEI. We have some Israeli funders, we have some corporate funders. And we're in conversations today about creating long-term joint ventures with the Ministry of Education to bring our expertise to more schools.
And we are in the Haredi community and in the Arab community.
We are talking about going into an Arab school, and if that happens, what we will do is recruit Arab staff to start adapting the program. The materials. Arab schools are very different than Jewish schools. Arabic language is different than Hebrew. It has to be as 2 languages. It's called diglossia, written and a spoken language. So the demands are different. The schools have a different culture. We're looking at that right now. That's something that could happen in the next couple of years. We work in one Shas school today. We're not working in any other Haredi schools, partly because our program is built around about reading a lot of books, and most of the schools won't let us bring those books into the schools. So it's in the Shas school, we designed and tailored a library specifically for that school, but the Shas schools are also different one from another. So it's not our focus at this point, though there are things I think that would be useful for everybody. Let me tell you a little bit, just zoom out a little bit for a minute and say that the problems afflicting Israeli schools are not unique. The quality of school leadership, the quality of the teachers in low-income schools in Israel is usually middling to poor. That's not where the system tracks its best and brightest instructors or school leaders, unfortunately. There are issues, as in the States, the profession is not highly esteemed. It's still considered to be underpaid, even though there were reforms in the last decade that significantly raised salaries. It's still far from the salary that's going to attract somebody to go into teaching rather than to go into high tech. So it's not competitive, and we don't get too many of the best and brightest going in. There are groups like Chotam, Teach for Israel, which is finding ways to bring some of those young, intellectually excited people in. And there are wonderful teachers in the system, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that we have star teachers even in our weakest schools, but in general, these people are not getting the training they need, and we're not getting the people that we need into those places. Schools in Israel tend to be understaffed. They'll have about 40% fewer staff people than a New York City public school would have. So people are juggling multiple jobs. And the education budget is problematic. But there's a different level of problem. We see that in low-income schools, expectations are very low. Mary Ann mentioned it before. When we started to work with the Ethiopian Israeli children, we saw the system had given up on them already. They didn't expect them to succeed. And there was no sanction for failure. So if a school underperformed year after year, the principal might get a rebuke from her supervisor, but it would be soon forgotten and nothing would actually change. We realized that saying do better next time, or sending out standards which nobody knew how to reach, not giving schools the way, the means, the tools it would take to actually produce better results wasn't going to do very much. They also didn't see the parents as partners in the system. Now they tend to see, some groups of the low-income communities in Israel, the parents are very disconnected from the schools. We saw the Ethiopian Israeli parents was the most extreme situation we had encountered. In some places with active hostility between the parents and the school faculty. So we knew we had to change that too. So again, we had to change expectations, we had to change relationships, we had to improve school management and school leadership, and most of all, we had to improve teaching. I mean, the children learn or don't learn in the classroom. And you have to help the teachers find ways to teach them better. So our question was really, what's the right place to invest? And the answer to us seemed obvious. I mean, I'll say we did quite a bit of research. We visited 50 schools in New York City in lowest income areas. I grew up in Queens, so these are all the neighborhoods I was not allowed to go to. I had to make sure never to get off of those subway stops. And we went to see the schools that were succeeding despite all odds in Bedford-Stuyvesant, in Harlem, in the South Bronx. And we interviewed the principals and the faculty and said, what are you doing that's different? What are you doing that the school across the street is not doing? And the model we developed came out of that investigation. And so that told us that the place that we really had to work was on teaching. We had to invest, we had to bring specific models to teachers, show them a way that they didn't know to raise students' achievements, to track student progress, to individualize the instruction, and we had to provide the resources. So if we wanted to focus on reading, writing, speaking, listening, we had to give them books because they don't have books in the classroom. So we have leveled libraries, as Mary Ann mentioned, in every classroom of 500 to 1,000 books, leveled by difficulty. That enables the kids to always be reading at their just right level. But we had to give the teachers more than that. So we adopted the coaching model, very common in the United States, to have a literacy coach or an instructional coach in the building. Before we started it, it was unknown. So today, only in our schools and the Yetta schools, the ICEI and Yetta schools, are there instructional literacy coaches there, which means you have someone on site 5 days a week doing professional development. And Israel has quite an elaborate network of professional development. For 10 years, I did assessments and program evaluation of many of those projects. And the flaw that I saw was that very little of what happened at those trainings got back to the classroom. Teachers got their batteries recharged. They may have had a stimulating experience, but they didn't change anything in the way they were teaching. So we built our model differently. We said we have to be in the classroom. We have to go into the nuts and bolts. That's what's not working. We have to fix the schools. And so we adopted a coaching model. But we also know, anyone who works in education knows that the most important person in any school building is the principal. And the principals also needed mentoring. Some of them needed skills on school management. All the teachers and principals needed skills on classroom management. So we bring in very clear, what they call routines. And you have to stop, even if it means investing a month of your time practicing with the kids how they walk into the class, how they get up to go get a book and return to their desk. If you invest that time and establish those routines clearly, then you have the opportunity for learning. And if you don't, then you're going to be dealing with discipline problems every day. When I observed hundreds of classes when I was doing evaluations, It took 7 to 10 minutes on average to quiet the kids down every lesson. That's an hour a day that you're losing. That's a day a week you're losing just getting the kids on task. When people come to our schools, they say, where are the kids? Are they on a field trip because it's so quiet? We say, no, they're on task. Go in the rooms and you'll see. And this is without ever yelling at them, not hectoring them. It's just establishing very strong routines so the kids know what you want from them. And kids adapt to that very, very easily. They like knowing what's expected of them. That helps them. The structure liberates them and frees them up for actual learning and engagement. We saw that we needed to look at we needed to have an intervention that was really comprehensive. It had to affect the teaching, the leadership, also the community. So Mary Ann mentioned we work with Megashrim. Megashrim are Ethiopian-Israeli community liaisons. Today, the Fidel Association is one of our partners, supervises and operates that program for the Ministry of Education. And so we work closely with them, and we designed a program so that these Megashrim they don't need them for the original function, which was sort of translating for parents. Today, we use them to help the parents gain the tools to support their kids' learning at home, to get them more involved in school life. So I was actually just at Metro West last night. The Greater Metro West Federation is one of our big supporters, and we have a huge initiative in Rishon LeZion called the Atzmaut Plus program, which we integrated into our program to create a school-based version of a program designed to empower Ethiopian families, working with them also on their economic stability, on their employment opportunities, on their interfamilial relations. And there we work with people in a slightly different role called family and education coordinators. And we're testing that model to see if we get more impact on the kids' outcomes by actually getting very involved with the parents and the family lives, the parents who need that and are open to it, to help them strengthen their own situation. We're testing that to see if that's a model we would want to replicate elsewhere in our network. So we're always looking also at new things and new ways to change. So our overall program is called It's Elementary in English, or it's Yesodot L'Yesodi in Hebrew, Foundations for Elementary School. It's a wordplay. And it's really kind of a nuts and bolts root canal approach to elementary schools that need help because they're chronically underperforming. We also,
Let me just say one other thing. Moriah decided to go into elementary schools, partly because we had the opportunity, but partly because the earlier you intervene for the children, the earlier in their lives that you intervene, the less catch-up you have to do. And the more you can build their sense of capacity and their expectations. It's much harder to change the way kids respond to things and so on when they're older. And also, if children don't learn how to read, don't learn how to write, those are the things that are being focused on in the early grades. And they're not being focused on later. So the kids really miss out, and then they miss out on the content. So if we can reach the kids early, that's really important. And we also saw that there wasn't that much attention being made. There wasn't that much philanthropic generosity going to elementary schools. I don't know, maybe it's less sexy than some of the other programs, but we really felt that it was very important to give these kids the start and to give them the basics of literacy.
So that's, look, I think that's a key point because we have, our kids we collect a lot of data on our kids. There's very little data collected on elementary school children, but we're able to track each and every kid. And I mentioned before that the literacy is the focus, but that's what enables kids to do well in science as well. I mean, the kids struggle. Low-income kids tend to struggle when they get to informational texts that are of greater complexity than the kind of stories that teachers tend to read to them in the early grades. And so we've developed units of study with Matach, with the Center for Educational Technology, that focus specifically on that, on science-related nonfiction texts, so that they can get the language skills that they need to be able to understand those books, to understand science books and text. Let me just,
We have two.
questions, we're gonna come back to the questions. Okay, that's fine. And I'm just saying, bringing data-driven instruction and putting the focus on the skills the kids need to actually learn nonfiction and other kind of text is a crucial turning point for children who around 3rd grade tend to stop learning to read and start reading to learn. And that's where our kids start to regress. That's where our kids start to fall back.
Do you do the same early intervention with teachers? I've watched system, he's out of the book, the real disintegration of the system since my children were in school to now, that teachers tend to be absent once in 2 weeks. I think when you were a child, was a teacher ever absent unless she'd been run over or appendicitis and then she was out for 2 days?
They have a lot of babies.
You have a lot of babies, but you know about a baby, and you know about a baby, and you're going to get a substitute. It's going to be there for 3 months. The teacher deciding that she's going to the dentist and taking half a day off is another.
Yeah, look,
but that's also an early intervention with the teacher.
But this program, among
a
other
routine
things, does work with the teachers, and one of the things that we see is that the teachers gain a lot of enthusiasm and dedication to what they're doing. And as they see success, which they can see with almost every single child in their classroom, they're not going to take time off for nothing. But it is a problem in the schools that there's no budget and there's no program. Usually I can tell when a woman's pregnant. At least when she's very pregnant, but they don't prepare for that. So when a woman delivers, it's like a surprise, and there often is a hiatus.
Principal didn't notice. Maybe that's
and also the person who comes in is still teaching in what we consider a less effective way and doesn't know how to do this. I had actually thought part of your question when you said you come in earlier is that we find, younger teachers, newer teachers.
Yeah.
But we find too that there is resistance among the teachers. For instance, Don talked about, we teach the teachers, instead of starting with reading, start with writing in the very beginning. And there's resistance to that because they never work that way, and that's not how it's done in the system, even though we know that it's much better. But I want to take Paula's question. Or elaborate on that.
Well, Mike, a little bit off the track, but just in that course, I was surprised when I was talking to my grandchildren there, and the teachers can take 1 day a week off. They can pick which one of the school days they're off every week.
Well, that's because it's a 6 day school week.
Right.
So teachers work 5 out of those 6 days. The principals also work 5 out of those 6 days. Because most Israelis have moved over to some version of a 5-day work week already.
Well, why don't they just keep the schools open 5 days and
That's a good question. It's partly because the school days are very short. So to get the number of hours per week that you want to teach, they have the 6th day. And most Israeli schools, just a simple aside, but most Israeli schools do not have a lunchroom. They were not intended for kids to eat lunch on site. So the school day ends at 1:30 and kids go home and eat lunch. So they have, 6 shorter days and Friday's a half day.
Just a couple of questions. When you mentioned that 31%, by the way, I'm happy after Chelsea's doing well.
Yeah, it's doing great.
When you mentioned 31% of the children are below poverty level, you fairly defined poverty level. If you were to exclude the Arab sector, the Haredi sector, and the Ethiopian sector, what would that percentage be?
That covers a lot of them. So, that's the bulk. But there are other children in poverty in the country. There's some other weak groups.
The reason why I mention that is because, there could be a targeted focus on ones that are disproportionately represented.
Yeah.
A couple of other things. To what extent are efforts to build up the self-esteem of these kids and their parents too? I know that Ethiopian society is very patriarchal, and more often than not, the fathers don't do as well as the mothers, in Ethiopian society. And lastly, Does it make sense to make an effort to try to train Ethiopians to become teachers so that they can have a greater impact on all the issues confronting these kids?
Look, those are all excellent questions. So I would say we do a lot of work to build motivation for kids. Our belief is that the best way to motivate a kid is for the kid to have an experience of success. So we do less kind of touchy-feely things about how they feel about themselves and more celebrating their achievements. So for instance, we have an annual Young Writers competition for our 3rd through 6th graders. And there's a school-wide competition and a network-wide competition. We bring together 400 of the kids from the schools for a big program. They see a play, they meet real Israeli authors, we give out prizes to all the winners in the grades. They all go on with t-shirts. And this year we are about to publish a book of winning stories together with Yediot Books, which is one of the leading publishers in Israel. So they will see their own work in a book with professional illustrations, short biographies of themselves in the book, and we're constantly encouraging them to feel a sense of achievement.
But let me just give you an example to Don's point, that when they see themselves succeeding, it definitely raises their esteem. And when their teachers have high expectations for them, they feel that too, and they start developing high expectations. But the one example I want to give you is we went to visit a classroom where the children were writing. And there was one child who the teacher told us had been rather troublesome. And he finished his writing assignment, and his teacher was reading it with him. And he looked up with this big smile on his face, and he said, "I'm an author." And it was fabulous. And we see that kind of thing happening all along. So not only do we celebrate their successes, but we design the program so that they have successes, right. That they're not constantly living in a pool of failure where they and everybody else can see that.
We have publishing parties where the parents come and see their works presented after they finished a writing unit, and they present their works, and some of them are read aloud. And that, after the competition last year, one of our 11-year-old girls was interviewed on Channel 2 of leading commercial television on the top morning show in the country. So these are kids who could never dream that these things would happen to them. All of these things to encourage that sense of success. I just want to go back to just the questions you asked before. Yeah, because we didn't get to your other questions. We celebrate Ethiopian culture in the schools. I mean, the unique Ethiopian holiday of Sigd is coming up. And so, in fact, in Rishon LeZion, there'll be a program which all 3 schools will be doing together, and they're expecting to have 700 people there to mark the day. And the most popular Ethiopian Israeli band, which is called Cafe Shachor Chazak, Strong Black Coffee, will be performing. And just bear in mind that they're fall asleep. They're a leading band for the whole country. This is not a band that's popular in the Ethiopian community only. So they'll be there. So we find ways to bring that into the school, and the parents are there, and the parents speak about their experience in lives. And we bring, we have a program called Reach for the Stars. We bring Ethiopians who've been successful. We have a reporter in one of the news programs who's Ethiopian. We took the kids to the news studio to see it, and then he came to the school. And again, this is not just for the Ethiopian kids. It's for all the kids and all the teachers, because they're role models for them too, and we need to change their attitudes as well. And those things are replicable with any population group. Now, those are things that we want to reinforce for all the kids. Ethiopian teachers is a whole challenging subject unto its own. We've been approached by a few different groups that do train Ethiopian teachers. The problem there tends to be that they quit after a short time. There's a very high percentage of new teachers that quit the profession within the first 2 years everywhere. That's a problem in the United States as well. The Ethiopian teachers do it at an even higher rate, and we have an idea of what it would take to prevent that, to give them the kind of professional, very close mentoring and emotional support to get through those first couple of years, because every new teacher struggles.
But these teachers struggle especially because they're different. There aren't a lot of Ethiopian teachers, and they don't have a support group, and they don't want to admit, they often think that the kind of reactions that they get in their classroom are because they're Ethiopian. Some are and some aren't. And they think it's their fault that they're not a good disciplinarian or whatever it is. And also we found a certain amount of resistance on the part of principals to bring in Ethiopian teachers. And all the way up the education ministry, there were, I can't remember what some of the comments were, but it was pretty amazing.
Right, so that's, yeah.
Fascinating to just hear about what you've done, what you've accomplished. When did you first, what was it, just, I don't know the history of the organization. I know Operation Solomon happened in 1991, if I'm remembering correctly. So that population has been, the large immigration happened already 26 years ago.
Actually, the Operation Moses was in 1984.
Right, so I'm saying, right, that's a great point also. So I'm just curious when, let's say, take your first like in-school program, what year did that begin? And then the follow-up question, because I appreciate very much you said it as a throwaway. Clearly, you're trying to be very data-driven, and you're measuring. You at one point mentioned you're measuring the progress of each kid. So, for example, you showed a graph that showed the different achievement levels based on income, socioeconomic status. How effective has this program statistically? I would love to just hear. So, how now that you've done it for X number of years?
So we'll show you some. We'll show you some of the data now. It's actually good times. Let me make one point. The first group of Ethiopians who came, the Beta Israel, came in those two big operations. But the other half of the community that's in Israel came in the last 20 years since then. Those are usually called Falashmura, which is the derogatory name. But those are the Ethiopians who had converted to Christianity and then come back to Judaism. And they make up half the population in the country. I mean, today there's 140,000 Ethiopian Israelis, and they are really divided into those two groups. That immigration continued up until about 2 years ago. You still have people who came much later.
That actually just introduces another interesting question, which is, do you see differences between the group that's already been in Israel for a generation? And is that gap still so, like after army service and integration, or is it equal between the Falashmura and the original?
It's an interesting question. What we saw is that in some cases, the situation is dynamic because we're starting to get our first parents who were actually born in Israel, because we have young kids, so we have some very young parents. Also, 75% of the kids in the schools now the Ethiopian Israeli kids were born in Israel. So the majority are coming to elementary schools are born there. We still have 25% who immigrated, because the immigration, as I said, is continuing, and it probably will be renewed if Dr. Avram Nagosa, the only Ethiopian Knesset member, has his way. He's the chair of the Absorption and Immigration Committee.
And main voice for bringing them.
Right, for bringing the Falashmura, and there's another 5,000 or 10,000 people they want to bring. So that may still be renewed, but we've been supporting all parts of the community over these years. So what we saw for some of the children who were born in Israel, but whose parents came from Ethiopia, their language skills were weaker than the children who immigrated, who were born in Ethiopia and actually grew up somewhat in Ethiopia, because neither Amharic nor Hebrew was established firmly. They had no language that was very strong. They didn't really have a clear mother tongue, which means that the structures of language were not established in their brain properly, and there was very little, it's harder to build on that. So we found some of those kids were doing worse. Now we're starting to see that swing back, that the kids who are born here, because more of the parents now have more Hebrew. So there's, that situation changes over time. I would say that some of the veteran immigrants have a harder time because the absorption process was not done very well, and they never really integrated into society. There's more programs for the people today, so some of the newcomers got in faster, but it's a mix. It really varies from community to community. I wanted to show some of the data.
The Army experience has often not been successful for the Ethiopians, partly because of the issue of authority that I mentioned earlier, and partly because so many of the Ethiopians have family responsibilities, which will often, in their minds, trump their obligations to the Army. And as a result, a very high proportion of Ethiopian, at least men, in the Army do not finish the Army in good standing. I don't want to generalize it with the entire group, but it's higher there. So what those institutions which you think would bring the innovation along aren't always worth it.
So I want to show you some of the data. This is the Ministry of Education 2 years ago designed a new multi-step assessment for first graders. And we are probably implementing it more fully than anybody else in the country. Also, our Director of Education is the former Director of Foundational Skills Instruction for the ministry. So she was the person supervising all of the teaching for the country until 3 years ago. And she was also on the team that developed these assessments. So in this assessment, this is an assessment designed to look at a kid's capacity for reading. The first steps, which you're looking at the outcomes on here, are testing very simple things, reading names of letters, phonological awareness, which are intended to be predictive steps, meaning that will give the teacher an idea of which kids are more likely to do well throughout this process and which kids need more help right away, which kids are coming in already in first grade with deficits. Now remember, in Israel, the kindergarten is not part of an elementary school, and unlike the US, where kindergarten looks like what first grade used to look like, there's very little teaching that goes on in kindergarten. So the kids come to first grade with minimal reading readiness for most of our kids. And again, what we've seen is everything we're doing works for all low-income kids, not just for Ethiopians, because they're having a lot of the same deficits, even if some cases the Ethiopian kids' issues are more extreme. So what we see here is about 2/3 of the kids, or a little more in step one, seem to be doing well. Some of them need more help, but we still got 29–30% of those kids, 32% of the kids who really couldn't come close to doing even these first couple of steps. And what we saw, what we tracked over last year was how the kids progressed through the steps during the year. And I want to show you some of the data. And here I want you to pay particular attention to the issue of the socioeconomic status of the schools. Now again, we've gone into schools that were underperforming and that had concentrations of Ethiopian kids. Some of them are really very, very high poverty. Some of them are not. Where they are not, that means there's an Ethiopian neighborhood adjacent to a better off neighborhood and the kids are in the same school. So the ranking of the whole school is higher, but the Ethiopian kids are still living, for the most part, in poverty. Though some of them are moving, some of the families are moving up into the lower middle class and middle class. Let's take a look at the next slide. Here we go. Okay, so this is, here you can see, you can move it back to the bottom, that'll be easier to see. Okay, thank you. So what you're looking at now are our 33 classes. Each of those dots, excuse me.
They're all first
We're
grade
still looking at, we're only going to be looking at first grade. So these are the classes. All the way to the left is the highest socioeconomic status. That's probably what we would here consider to be lower middle class. And all the way to the right is very, very low. Those are among the poorest schools in the country. The only schools that are poorer than that are usually in the Bedouin community and a few other Arab communities. So these are 31 different classes. Let's go to the next slide, and you can see, I just wanted to see the socioeconomic ranking of the schools. Here we're looking at how the kids did on that first step, accuracy in reading names of letters at the beginning of the school year. And these are the success rates, and you see it kind of goes up and down. But when we start to group we divide them into 3 categories, we start to group them. Can you click that again, please? We'll get to the groupings in a minute. Here's the 33 classes plotted along. You'll see all the way to the left are our higher socioeconomic classes, and all the way to the right are our lowest socioeconomic classes. So we have some outliers, but we'll see, if you click that again, we'll see if we group them into 3 categories one more time, we'll see that the averages show a disparity, that the highest outcomes were 82% of the kids succeeded in that first group, which were the higher socioeconomic classes. Fewer kids, 76%. Oh, again, there's the outlier. There are a couple of classes that did very well, even though they're in that group. And then when we move to the right, we see the gaps get quite significant. We have some very, very low performing classes among our poorest schools, although our very poorest school is not the lowest performing. So it's not a one-to-one correlation, but it's still considered statistically quite a high correlation. Now, if we move forward.
Can I ask just one question?
Sure.
Are schools funded by local taxes like here in the United States, or is there any federal assistance?
No,
to all
schools get funding essentially from two sources, from the Ministry of Education and from their local municipality. There is more differentiated funding now than there used to be, meaning that schools that are higher poverty get some more funds from the government. It's nowhere near what they need to be delivering the services that ought to be delivered to these kids, but they do get more money per child than a school in a better off neighborhood. They also get funding from their local municipality, and their politics do come into play, but it's not, you don't have taxes that are directly funding schools. It doesn't work that way. Or if it does, people are not aware of it. Those are not issues that are actually debated in Israel the way they're debated in the US, because you don't have state taxes, you don't have state funding. It's different from state to state. You have pretty much national funding and then supplements coming from local municipalities. There are other funding streams. I mean, we're putting extra resources into these schools, so some schools benefit from other funding streams. And there are schools where the principal is adept at accessing grants and accessing funds, and other schools where the principals don't even know that such things exist. So there is still some differentiation. One of the big changes that happened in Israel in the last 2 years was they corrected the funding mechanisms which were disproportionately punishing the Arab schools. They were getting far less per student than the Jewish schools, and now that's been changed, and they should be getting the same amount moving forward. But if we're looking at our group here, we can see that we do have quite a noticeable disparity, although there are still outliers in each group. And if we jump now to the next slide, we'll see here, this is a summative step. This is a step looking at the end of the year to see how the kids did once they've been through first grade and been through the program. Here we see, first that, I think you click it one more time. We'll see that that all the kids did very well. To be having 83% or 87 or 88% of the kids passing the summative step means that they have equaled or surpassed the normative expectations that are built into this first grade assessment. And we see that the correlation between socioeconomic status and outcomes has disappeared. I mean, there's still a slight advantage to the better off, but the poorer schools are doing almost as well. And there's still a couple of those better off schools that are doing worse than some of the poorer schools. So, we were able to really, erase that correlation. So for us, these are very encouraging results. The Ministry of Education has held 2 seminars with all of their national language supervisors to come see what we're doing, because they're not getting these outcomes anywhere else. They don't have as systematic data anywhere else either, so they're using a lot of our data to learn about their own assessment tools. But these are very, very encouraging outcomes. So just jump to one more slide. I'll show you one other. So again, what I just told you, we've eliminated the correlation between socioeconomic status and outcomes. And all schools pretty much did equally well, high rates of success across the board, and we've matched the national norms. I just want to show you one other thing, and this will be our last slide.
So you mentioned national norms in all the schools?
The norms are built into the assessment. The government doesn't collect data about first graders. So everyone has these assessments, but we know because our education director was the team leader that developed the assessment for the ministry. So she knows what the norms, it was a norms-based assessment, meaning they tested lots and lots of kids and figured out what they think kids should be doing.
Based on what you said, you're basically the program is initiated at the first grade level based on some
Yes, that's where we get the kids, we get them in first grade.
Year.
Yes.
So effectively, you're saying within 1 year, you've been able to
close the gap.
Close the gap.
Right, and we still have, we still want to do better.
I'm
We
sure
still think we can do
I'm
better.
saying 1 year as well.
Yeah, so that's in first grade. This is a different set of data. Here, I just wanted to show you, looking at, can we get that bar out of the way? On the bottom there. Thanks. So what you're seeing here is when we test the kids when we come into a new school in the first year. So if you look at the bar on the left, this is broken down into the blue area is well above standard, the green area is at standard, or slightly above standard, the gray area is approaching the standard, the yellow is below standard, and the red is far below standard. Those are kids who really need a lot of help. Now again, sometimes in first year, we're looking at a lot of first graders. First graders have not yet been assessed to see whether they are learning disabled or whether they need special education. So all those kids are still in that sample. But as we move along and we see that that's the first year that the program is in the school, that's the breakdown.
One other thing you should know is that we test all the kids in each class. The norm is to tell some kids to stay home on testing day and not test them, because the teachers don't want, and the principals don't want their results to be lowered. And it's not unusual. We've had issues like this in the States as well, where we've had teachers who change the answers because they want to look better. But we do test every single kid in the class, although on some of our charts, there's a blank area at the bottom where there's 1 to maybe 3 kids who weren't tested.
And that's because the teacher felt the kid wasn't ready to, it would just be so frustrating for the child to be assessed on something he was going to obviously fail at, that they would exclude them. Now I will say, just to be open with you, we saw a bias among teachers, and even in the schools we're working with, that they were disproportionately not testing the Ethiopian kids, and that's something that we come and deal with them first by showing them the data, showing them what they're doing, and because they're not often aware that they're not doing it consciously. We say you have to ask yourself whether it's your expectations or the kid's abilities that are really the problem here. But let me just get back to this. What we see here is the impact that the program has over time. So the left column is the first year that we're in the program, and that's kind of the breakdown that we see when we get in. About half the kids are where they should be, and half the kids are not where they should be. Looking at the second and fifth year, we've just grouped that together. You can see the situation is improving. Gradually, we're getting up to 2/3, 3/4 of the kids are where they should, about 2/3 of the kids are where they should be. When we've been in the school for 6 years, so here we're looking at a school that's been with us for a while, and the program's in all the grades already, and some of those kids have been in the program for most of their academic career. A couple of the kids in the 6th grade have been in the program for all of their academic career. Then we see a very different picture. We've got 75% of our kids almost are where they should be, or 73%. We've got another 20% who are getting close. And what to me is also very encouraging is that percentage on the very bottom is tiny. Those kids who are really, really far behind shrinks down to a very, very small number. So this data shows us that the cumulative, the incremental impact over time is very important. There's no quick fixes for elementary school.
But I would just also like to say, one of the things that I've learned about ICEI is that there's curiosity on the part of the staff. And so they're constantly examining the results. They're getting data, which helps, and they're constantly asking questions about, well, why is this, or what could we do to make it better? So one of the things that isn't reflected in the long term is that the year before last, that normative test was given to the 1st graders, and we were pleased with the outcomes across the board, but we saw that there were 4 classes that had outperformed significantly all the rest of the classes. And so what Don and his team did was to go look at those classes and talk to the teachers to see what were they doing that was different from what the other 28 classes were doing. And they found a number of factors, 4 of which I remember. The expectations, that those 4 teachers really had high expectations for all of their students and for themselves. And that the children had higher expectations. They also, since we don't run these schools, we can make recommendations, but we can't enforce what we're doing, although doing this evaluation helped us. But while we've taught the teachers that they need to introduce writing early, some of the teachers resist, and they didn't do it as much or whatever. And that was a big factor in the difference between the outcomes. And another factor was we suggested to the teachers that rather than waiting and trying to figure out for particular kids whether they were primarily visual learners or auditory learners or kinesthetic learners or whatever the other major one is. Just teach everything you teach to the extent you can using all 4 methods. And that made a big difference in my mind for 2 reasons. One, you're catching kids who don't get the primary method that the teacher uses. And secondly, those methods all reinforce each other. So if kids are getting it from different kinds of promotion or expression, they really do absorb better what the teacher is trying to teach. And so what I wanted to say with respect to this chart is this chart includes results from before the last 2 years, where we've been really focusing on first grade and using some of the things that we just learned. And so we are hopeful and we expect that the long term will be even better than this.
Right, look, we know that the key really is investing in teachers and in school leadership. And we know that what we're doing will work for all schools. I mean, it would work also for middle class and upper middle class and wealthy schools as well. Because it's about improving instruction. It's about improving school leadership and management. It's about addressing the needs of every kid. And we make special efforts for the Ethiopian Israeli community. But what we're doing provides an answer for schools. And Israel needs better schools. This is our future. And it's a mistake to say, well, we're getting by with just those high achievers, or we're getting by, or what they didn't learn in school, some of those kids will learn in the Army, which is true. Some kids get a second chance in the Army, but some of the kids don't get to the Army. Or if they do, they don't get into a position that's going to lead to any opportunities. So for us, if we want to equalize opportunity in Israel, this is the best place to invest. Elementary school is the only time we will ever have a child for 6 years in a row in the same structure, in the same school. So we have our maximum impact.
And where you will capture nearly every single child.
Right.
Because if you wait until high school, some of them are gone.
Right, and that's
Not just that they're not there, but some of them aren't there magically.
And that's where most of the funding investment, both from the philanthropic community and from the government goes. It goes into high schools because of the matriculation exams, because of the dropout issues, because of Army acceptance rates, and a lot of indicators, a lot of metrics that can show that you're succeeding or not succeeding. Those are serious needs, and those investments are needed as well. But the elementary school is really one of the weak links, and that really needs to be improved if we want to get all kids to have an opportunity to succeed later on.
Yeah, let's take some questions.
Question. You've identified what I'm convinced and you've demonstrated is the weak link and successful approach to it. But given the expertise that you've gathered, what would be the next 2 weakest links in the Israel educational system?
Well, look, I think there's
now leaving aside the issue of secularism, the Haredi and the Arab sects.
Right, I mean, Israel, it's so complicated because you have multiple different systems, and the systems are operating on different sets of values, they're operating on different methodologies.
We are very impressed with your work.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
Thank you. So I think improving teacher training is a huge issue. Finding ways to attract more ambitious, creative, innovative people to the field is a big issue. Middle schools need work. If we had the resources, we'd love to continue to go up into middle schools. I think that that's another area that needs significant investments.
In the area of literacy?
In literacy and in all subject areas. I think
Making teaching respectable.
Right, I mean, I think, there's
Salaries, it's a simple.
right. If salaries were higher, if it was a more prestigious position, the salaries don't need to be raised by 10%, they need to be raised by 100%. You need to make this a competitive profession so that our kids, when they're choosing where they're going to go, will find this to be an attractive alternative. And you're not only going to have the idealists or the people who are looking for an undemanding work life.
But
So
also, as Tom said, you can't make 100% of a change, and you can't substitute for some of the things kids aren't getting in their family, in their community. So middle school, which really is problematic for many kids, particularly low-income kids, really these kids could use better, the teachers could use better teaching methods.
This is a tangential but maybe relevant point, and again, the Israeli educational system is really foreign to me, in general. But the vestiges of socialism, you talk about schools not building lunchrooms, meaning, I think in the United States, for instance, and this is really anecdotal, just without any data, without really understanding the field at all, even in some of the underprivileged communities. So I think some of the focus has been, let's set up after-school programs just to keep them away from, what's a kid going to do if he's, 1:30 going home? So even from a lobbying public policy standpoint, is there any effort in Israel being made? You could do after-school programs just to keep the kids in the school, but is there any effort being made to change this whole model of kids being done at 1 o'clock in the afternoon? Sorry?
there's
No, that's what Shas did, and that's what it became a social services organization. But even from an educational standpoint, is there an effort being made, especially with the nonsense that you were pointing out? I mean, hearing it, and I'm sorry for not being familiar with it, but teachers 1 day a week decide they're not showing up, and then switch to 5 days a week, longer school days.
And when they have the 5-day week, they don't always take, like they always take Thursday. So, you don't know how substitutes
it goes hand in hand, it's a question. Is there a public policy effort being made?
Some of those things happen. There are already frameworks for a longer school day, extended school day, and that usually goes for low-income communities or communities on the periphery. The challenge of the longer school day is, are you doing more of the same? Are you doing more bad instruction? Or are you finding a way to enrich the instruction and the kids' experience? If you can improve, again, we had to prioritize. We had to say, okay, we can't fix everything. So let's try to fix the teaching. Let's try to fix the heart and soul of this. Then if we can do that, then the place for enrichment programs and remedial programs are playing their proper role. They're adding to kids other things that they're not getting in that core instruction. You can't expect those things to do the job of schools. But yes, there is a policy now that if an entire municipality decides to switch to a 5-day school week, they can. Ra'anana switched to a 5-day school week. My children went to the Democratic school. They voted to switch to a 5-day school week and then found out they could only actually do that if all of Kfar Saba decided to switch to a 5-day school week. So when they switch, the days are longer. The teachers are there all 5 days. They just get Friday and Shabbat off, like other people who work a 5-day work week in Israel. And so those issues have been raised. It's a very unwieldy system to move, and it's hard to change because so many people are used to the way it is now.
Yes, I was going to say that education systems everywhere are difficult to get changed, but in Israel we find it particularly difficult, and particularly when you have the municipality and the ministry involved in the schools, they have to reach agreement on some things, and it's really hard.
And then they concentrate on changing the curriculum politically rather than educationally.
Well, what we're doing is trying to show that schools need to change, that they're capable of change, and what are the changes that are good changes. And that has to be shown. If you legislate, okay, schools have to do better or whatever, if you don't have some methods, strategies, et cetera, if you haven't identified some of the most important things that should be done, and identified what the resources are, because if the resources aren't there, if we didn't have books in the classes, we wouldn't be doing it well. If we didn't have a literacy instructional coach in each school, and several people, funders, when we went to them, would say, well, what do you mean you have a literacy coach full-time in each school? They should be in 4 or 5 schools. Well, you wouldn't get the same results if you water it down. And so it's really important, we feel, to provide the example of what can be done and how at least one way it can be done. I'm sure there are some other ways, but we found something that really is working. We're constantly working to make it work even better, and trying to spread the information out. So the fact that the ministry brought their supervisors to see what was happening in these schools, we think is a really good first step. But there are a lot more steps that would
How
happen.
many more schools, meaning your target population, if with that, before you expand to middle schools and the higher socioeconomic, you're at 32 schools. 5 years ago, you're in, 2 years ago, you're in how many schools?
Look, there are several hundred low-income schools that are underachieving.
So that's really your target, all the low-income underachieving schools.
Eventually, look, we still give priority to schools that have concentrations of Ethiopian kids, and there are more schools like that. Today, the reason that we're not in those schools is that municipalities are not willing or are not able to put the funding in. So we're talking to the Ministry of Education about finding a way so that we're not dependent on municipal funding at all. So we'll be only the ministry and private.
If you continued with your core market, which is the low socioeconomic with a high Ethiopian concentration, how many more schools? I'm just trying to get a sense.
There today probably another 20 to 30 schools that fit the profile.
Exactly.
And then there's probably another 100 schools that the ministry is interested for other low achieving, low income areas around the country that would benefit from it. I mean, there's more schools than that, but we would start with the ones that are the neediest. So they're talking to us about doing joint ventures on our whole program, also on our what we call our program for just first and second grade, to bring in the basic literacy program that we've been doing here that we talked about today to more schools. They're also talking about using having us work with training and recruiting principals, to bring principals in. So we will bring in better people, or bring in young people and teach them better ways to be principals from the outset. That could be a very exciting prospect and a real opportunity to have impact on many more schools.
One of the issues, let me just say this, one of the issues that we face is that the ministry it's not a static amendment, but they've agreed only to pay for the cost of the instructional coach. And they're not even paying as much as we feel these people have to be paid. So we're supplementing that. They're paying them as if they were teachers, because they don't have this position in the schools. And one of the things that holds us back is raising the money to support all the things that we would love to do. So it's the ministry isn't they're not ready to take it on, and I don't know if they would, because generally the ministry feels that whatever it does for a group of schools, it has to do for all schools, and then they would water it down and it would not be effective. So
what does a coach cost a year?
A coach costs about $60,000 or $70,000. That's a teacher. That's a cost to employer. And Israel has extraordinarily high taxes, so a good chunk of that is going to the government.
If we could pay them even more, we could attract better coaches.
Right. So we do supplement a teacher's salary with a grant that the teachers get. They pay taxes on that as well. But that's a teaching
cost.
Yeah, that's a cool.
And so far, the ministry is committed to paying whatever the teacher salary equivalent is for those people.
For those 31 teachers.
Besides the cost of teaching, if you wanted to roll it out from one additional school, what's the incremental cost to roll it out to one?
Well,
not just the teacher cost, but
right. The operational costs are about $150,000, $160,000, and there's one-time investment costs to put in because we bring in classroom libraries. So there's one-time investments for those. But we've
that you'll be able to get, like Pajama, are you able to?
Well, Pajama Library gives out a few books a year. We're putting in hundreds of books, so it's great that they're giving those out. But, right, but in each, hundreds of books in every classroom. So it really adds up. That's about.
And we have to provide furniture too to support this.
Right, so that's about 10,000.
Having the kids all lined up, facing the teacher's back, we have to be able to bring them into groups, so the teacher can move around and.
I don't want to cut off the conversation. We are out of time.
Okay.
Yeah, so feel free to stay.
Did people have questions on the phone?
Yeah, that's what I wanted to ask. Anybody on the line via computer or phone like to ask a question?
Okay. Well, I just want to thank all of you for coming today and for your interest and your questions and thoughtfulness.
How can they reach out and follow up with you?
So you have here the folders here. You have the information. people on the
If you want
phone,
to take more and give them to somebody else you know, feel free.
right? And you can reach us at ICEI. You can write directly to me. We have a website. You can look for the Israel Center for Education in the Nation website, which will have our contact information. Or you can write to me at D Futterman. It's D as in David, F as in Frank, UTTERMAN at icei.org.org.il, and you will find us.
Is that in the written?
Yes, that's all in the written materials. My card's in the written materials here as well.
And thank you.
Thank you.
so
Thank you,
much.
everyone.
Thank you, everyone, for coming. Thank you, Mary Ann.
And you work at this school?
We work with, there's now 4 schools that are affiliated with YEDA.